Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking through that break with me. If you are just tuning in, we just went over the new 14-team proposed format for the college football playoffs. We just took a look at what might become of the NCAA, especially football-centric. In this segment, we're going to continue talking about college sports, but we're going to move into college basketball. The big tournament in the year is coming up right around the corner. March starts tomorrow. So March Madness right around the corner. There has been more talks about expansion. There's been more talks about what if they should expand, how they should expand, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be a bigger part of the show than you are right now, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net, leave a tip or donation with a message. It'll scroll across the screen for me, you, and everyone to see. We appreciate anything you can give. But like I said, we're going to get right into this. The March Madness, should it expand? So a brief history of March Madness expansion before we get too far into what's happening. March Madness started in 1939. There were just 8 teams. The first tournament was won by the Oregon Ducks. They beat Ohio State 46-33. And it gradually expanded. It grew to 16 teams in 1951, 32 in 1975, and finally the full tournament as we know it today, or almost as we know it today, 64 teams, first time in 1985. They did add the first 4 in 2011, so we are at 68 right now, but the real tournament is still at 64. The new proposal that was voted on in January by the board of directors for the NCAA Division 1, they approved the recommendation to expand it to 90 teams or 80 teams. I've seen 80 teams be talked about a little more. And I'm curious what the public thinks on this, because I've seen a lot of people higher up in organizations talking about what this might look like. I haven't heard a lot of opinions. Now, obviously, we just finished talking about the NCAA. They're a business. They're big on money. You know, the March Madness is one of the biggest money-making series of games in sports. You know, it's one of those things that makes, if you look at the numbers that they make on March Madness alone, I believe it's in the billions. So expanding it would be great for them, but for a competitive standpoint, I'm not so sure. There's coaches that are on the fence about it. Coaches are split. The great Tom Izzo, coach of Michigan State, said it could diminish the product, and I tend to agree with him there. You look at, with 64 teams already, these 15 and 16 seeds, they're not winning that many games. You know, you have 11 ever 15 seeds to win games, although there have been winners 3 years in a row. And as far as teams on the 16 seed line, they've only ever won twice. They've only ever won twice since 1985. Almost 40 years of basketball, and they've only ever won 2 games. When you combine the 15 and 16 seeds, they are 13 and 300 all time in that first round. It's not really, expanding it isn't going to improve the product. I went through, they didn't have this stat, I went through every single first number 1 seed versus number 16 seed game that has ever been played, and I found the margin of victory numbers. The average margin of victory is 24.2 points. It's not a competitive basketball game, and that's already what it's at. You know, expanding it to 80 teams sure would be good for some of these mid-major programs. And here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network, we are all about mid-major programs, group of 5 schools, getting that representation that they deserve, because they put a lot into athletics. These players that aren't on the Power 5 stage, they deserve to get as much recognition as those Power 5 players as well, because they play their hearts out every single night. So anything that helps them, usually we're here for on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. But for this one specifically, you look at the disparity between the 16 seeds and the 1 seeds that match up every year. And now imagine if they expand it to 90 teams. First of all, it's going to ruin the magic of the tournament a little bit. Having it at 64 teams kind of provides I don't want to call it a perfect tournament, but it kind of is, because you don't get any buys. And I think that's what makes March Madness so appealing. That's what makes it so much fun. You're playing games right in a row. Anything can happen in college basketball, and no one gets a bye. No one gets that extra special treatment other than getting a theoretically easier path if they are a higher seed. It's almost, and I hesitate to say a perfect tournament, because it's really hard to make something a perfect tournament, but it's just a really clean setup. It's very well put together, and making up to 90 teams, you're going to have to do a bunch of complicated bye stuff. It's simple to understand. You play one team, you move on, you move on, you move on. It's very well done. I love how it's put together right now. It's going to ruin the product, not just because they're going to be letting these teams that, quite frankly, don't have a shot at really making noise in the tournament. Like I said, there have only been 2 16 seeds to ever win a game. What do you think's going to happen when they expand it to 17 seeds and 18 seeds and get to 20 seeds? Do you think those teams are ever going to win a game? Sure, maybe then we see some 16 seeds win a couple more games because they'll be playing 4 and 5 seeds that might have a bad day. But you put these 20 seeds in, it's not going to be a 24-point game. It's going to be a 50-point game. It's going to be a 35, 40-point game. These games are going to be so uncompetitive. Like, right now, 24 points is a lot. It is. But you get these 16 seeds that can compete. You get these 16 seeds that can give teams a scare. We saw it last year. A 16 seed beat Purdue. We saw it a couple years ago when a 16 seed beat Virginia. Right now, it doesn't happen, right? It's almost a lock that it doesn't happen. They win 1% of their games. But in the off chance that they do, that they are competitive, and it can happen when a 16 seed is competitive with a 1, if they expand it, not only is it going to make the bracket messy, and it's going to make it not as I guess, again, I'm just going to call it a perfect bracket, because that's really what it is. It's going to ruin that perfect bracket, and the level of competition is going to go down regardless. It is almost impossible to expand it, and I know there's 300 plus teams in the NCAA, and the reason that they're looking at expanding it is because they want 25% to make it. But are 25%, this is for a championship, are 25% of the teams really worthy of competing for a national championship? I'm not sure about that. There's teams that get in every year that probably aren't worthy of competing for a national championship. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't get a shot, especially if it's automatic qualifiers. But these at-large bids, you'd have to be adding about 30 more at-large bids to the system. And I don't think there's 30 more teams that deserve to compete for the national championship every year. Now, you see it where it gets to a point where, you have to expand because teams are getting too stacked. And I don't think we're at that point in college basketball. It happens a lot in pro sports, like the NBA. They expanded their league, and it fixed a lot of competitive balance issues. Right now, I think college basketball is at a good spot where it doesn't need to do this. This is as much fun as it is to have more March Madness. I love March Madness. As much fun as it would be to have more of it, expanding it really does not make a lot of sense. You want to put the best product out there for the fans to enjoy, and expanding it any more than this is only going to diminish it. It's only going to make the first round matter less. We're going to get to the point where, like bowl games, we don't care about a lot of them. We'll only start paying attention 2 rounds in when we're like, oh, now we go. You know, I don't want that to happen to March Madness. And I'm not trying to be that old man waving a stick in the air saying change is bad. Because I'm all for some change, but expanding it to 90, especially now, just doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe 10 years from now we can reassess and we can see if there's more deserving teams. If there's 30 more deserving teams. I'm fine if they wanted to expand it by 10 maybe, but making it 100 teams, 90 teams, it's not gonna do it. It's not worth it. It's not going to make the product any better. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Is it worth it to expand March Madness? Would you care if these first round games weren't competitive anymore? Would you still enjoy March Madness as much as you do right now? I don't think I personally would, but you never know. In our next segment, we are going to continue our coverage of the MLB offseason, this time taking a look at the Kansas City Royals. They had a pretty solid offseason after losing over 100 games last year. We're going to take a look at them, and in our fourth segment, I put together my first mock draft of the year ahead of the NFL Combine. So we're going to dive into my mock draft, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But stick around through this break. On the other side, we're moving into baseball. We'll be right back.